Hi, guys. Today, what we have a special treat. We have a special interview that we were able to put together from the questions that you guys asked last week for a person who's actually working currently in the biotech community. So stay tuned as we join that interview. I'd like to welcome Mr. Damon Tighe. He is from BioRad Laboratories, where he is out of the Bay Area, a curriculum and training specialist. Could you tell us a little bit about your education and background and what drew you into the field of biotechnology?
Sure. I'm going to start by going actually way, way back actually to where all you guys are, because I think that's, for me, that's kind of where it really started. So I grew up in a really rural part of California called Calaveras County. We literally had one stoplight in the county when I grew up there. And there was only a handful of like job options. It was like my parents, like they were in the education system. My mom was like an art teacher at the middle school. There was being a rancher or working in forestry. I've done ranching during the summers. And then there was also working in the medical community at the local hospital. So I was really lucky. And my high school had a career and technical education program, which at the time we called ROP, Regional Occupational, that gave people the chance to go get involved and hands-on with a job that they, or a career that they thought they might be interested in. So my senior year, I got to basically take 3 periods a day. Well, one of them was a 0 period, and put it towards working at a surgeon's office in the local community. And what I learned from that was I really liked science applied to do community good. But I also learned I really did not like a clinical environment. It just kind of gave me the creeps. I just like always just kind of, it just didn't fit.
Okay.
I knew I wanted to take that like science stuff that I kind of liked, and I liked really the aspect of applying it to community good. And so I ended up in college. That was still kind of my focus, but I was still trying to figure out what does that look like. And from that ROP experience, that CTE experience, I'd really figured out that if you really want to figure out what you want to do, a lot of it means trying to go and do that thing, which means trying to get internships and things like that, because you learn what the fluff is, like the stuff that you kind of thought that career was about,
Right.
what it's about. And if you like it, you learn what are the skills I need to learn in order to like get a career here? What's the education I need in order to get a career here, which are really important. And so in college, I struggled to get an internship. Like my freshman summer, my sophomore summer, I did not land a thing that I thought was going to help me figure out my career. In fact, I ended up like working at like a paralegal office because that was the only thing I could land. And like legal is the last place I want to be. Let me tell you, I'm not a paper pusher at all. But my junior year, I finally landed something where I got an internship working in a research lab. And what I learned was, I was like, this is it. This is that I like science and it's being applied to community good. And for a lot of people, like seeing that with research, they're like, I don't get what you're saying. You're not a doctor. You're not like an EMT. And like what I saw was, this is in contrast to the surgeon I worked for. The researchers, when they figured something out, it was helping people they would never meet in their life.
Mm-hmm.
And then also you saw that these researchers that were already like gone from this world, the stuff they did was still helping people today. Where that surgeon I worked for, he helped the people he saw day to day, but beyond that, unless he was publishing and I didn't know it, that was the extent of it, right?
Right.
And so like, this is what I want to do. And that's what helped me kind of focus on this path of getting into biotechnology. But then to go beyond that, and remember, guys, like things are not easy to get into. It takes a lot of determination. Remember, like it took me like 3 years basically to get an internship, just trying to get a taste of what I wanted to do. Then when I got out of college and out of teaching high school, I knew I wanted to work on the Human Genome Project. And that was a project at the time to basically decode all the A, T, C's, and G's in the human so we could start making these giant medical strides we knew that information would let us have. So what I realized from a strategy point of view, the best thing I could do is just tell everybody I knew what I wanted to do. on top of doubling down, knocking, doing all the door knocking, all the resume sending. And surprisingly, what got me into my first job at the Joint Genome Institute was somebody I'd worked with on a newspaper I went to college with. I would never have guessed this, right? Never have guessed this. For her kind of fiance husband at the time was working for a recruiter that was helping get people into some of these laboratories that were working on these things. And it was that kind of combination that I think first gave me that first little door opening, right?
Okay.
Oh, you guys have those skills. You know you got that skill down pat. So if you can just get that door open, you can make it happen, right? So you guys able to get in there and kind of grow all of a sudden. But it really comes down to doubling down on the skills, doubling down on if there's something you think you want to do as a career, figure out how to get immediate contact with that career, to figure out the skills, figure out the techniques, figure out the education, and then tell everybody what your dream is. And it's a really weird, hard thing to do, but it actually works. It's telling people, hey, you know what? This is what I want to do. I'm trying to figure out how to do it. You'd be surprised what your network knows that you don't know. And I think those are like the big take homes, at least from where I ended up in biotechnology.
Okay. So as a curriculum training specialist, exactly how do you work along with schools as far as expanding knowledge of biotechnology and the availability of careers in the field?
Yeah, so it's a hard question because it's very dynamic. So there's the thing that BioRad sees, as like, this is what your job is, it's written in, which is basically making sure educators that are trying to teach this stuff are trained, have access to learning the skills so they can then teach students. But it gets a lot more complicated once you actually start talking to each individual instructor, right? Because there needs to be beyond that, especially if you're talking about how do they then see the bigger picture of what's going on. So a lot of times it comes to figuring out who are the players in the community that I might have into my network in some way. How can I kind of bring them in, get them to collaborate with that school, or at least inform the school about what's going on locally. And then some of these educators have very different ideas of what biotech means for them and figuring out how to support them along those ways, And so, I mean, for some people, it's using biotech to look at their local ecology. I'm not an ecologist, right? But I try and figure out what can we do there? Who are the experts? How can I help get resources? Because, man, as an educator, being a former high school teacher, you just don't have time. The amount of time it takes to just come and teach classes that you already know everything about is unsurmountable sometimes. So to then to like learn something new and figure out how to bring that in is just a lot of times you don't have. So anything that I can kind of figure out that I can do to support them is what I try to do. And it's different every place.
Okay. So now William and Nigel were just curious about what exactly is COVID-19 and what has caused it to be so compromising to the human body system.
Okay, good question. This might be a long one. Hold on. So COVID-19 is in the same class of viruses that you would hear commonly talked about as a cold virus. The word cold virus really describes actually three types of viruses. Coronaviruses, which COVID-19 is. Rhinoviruses, these ones that attack your rhino, your nose, and your upper respiratory. And then adenoviruses that kind of attack upper, lower respiratory. What makes COVID-19, this coronavirus, so kind of scary is partly the tissues that it attacks. And it attacks these tissues based upon its surface protein, which is known as the spike protein, which also is where COVID or coronaviruses derive their name from. Corona means to have like a crown, right? Like a king's crown. If you look at a coronavirus under a scanning electron microscope, they look like a crown, and it's because of all these spike proteins sticking off of them. The spike protein on COVID-19 interacts with a receptor known as ACE2. ACE2 is in high density on lung tissue, smooth muscle tissue like your heart, and neurological tissue, which means that this virus, COVID-19, much like the SARS virus from 2002, 2019, which was also coronavirus, both of them go after ACE2. it can cause major damage to these really, really important tissues. So for in the lungs, what's going on is it's not only damaging the tissue there in the way that viruses normally damage tissue, which is gets inside the cell, replicates itself, causes the cells to more or less die and explode, but it's also stimulating the immune system in a way that the immune system's getting overly focused and accidentally causing more damage in that space. So the immune system a lot of times will loosen the junction between cells so that white blood cells can get out of your vascular system into the space where the invader is at. When this happens in the lung space at a high degree, you have not only those white blood cells getting in there, but plasma getting in there, basically leaking out and kind of drowning out the capacity of what the lung is supposed to do, which is exchange oxygen for carbon dioxide. So what you're seeing is these patients that are dying of COVID, a lot of them are dying due to desaturation. Their oxygen levels in their blood are literally just drowning out. And that's what makes this really, really kind of scary. On top of it, attacking other tissues that you might not be getting as much media attention right now because we're worried about the lungs because that's where people are being killed from. But we're also seeing damage taking place to hearts, damage taking place to neural tissue. So we're seeing an increase in heart attacks and strokes in some of these COVID patients. And we also don't know what this is going to mean for the long term on these tissues for patients that do survive, which is, I mean, scary.
Okay. So Juan and Josh were interested in how it's different and similar to the flu. Can you share a little bit about that?
Good question. Yeah. So coronaviruses in general and flu viruses are both RNA viruses. They use RNA to hold all the information about how to replicate, how to get away with stuff in your body, basically. Flu is relatively small as far as the amount of RNA that's in there. So we say it has a small genome. Coronaviruses are really, really large. Coronaviruses don't mutate as fast as flu viruses go, which is a silver lining, as much as there can be a silver lining with COVID-19, is that it does not appear to be mutating really, really fast. Where like flu, it mutates enough, and every year we're worried about a different flu virus. And where we worry about that is the surface proteins on flu, the H and the N, mutate enough that all of a sudden they're targeting different places in the body, or the immune system is reacting to them differently. Both corona and both corona and flu viruses can overstimulate the immune system. So you see that every once in a while with a flu strain that comes out that can amplify the immune system's basically response and cause major damage due to that, in the same way that we're seeing it with COVID-19. But the danger with flu is that we see it change all the time. And that's what makes that one really, really scary, is how quickly it changes. COVID's not doing that, which is good, but the danger about COVID is it goes undetected so well. And that's because so many people that are infected are asymptomatic. So there was a study in Iceland where they looked at 10,000 people randomly from their population and tested them to see if they had an active COVID infection. Half of the people that tested positive had no symptoms, which means those people are out there spreading it and don't know it. And there's a degree of that happens with flu, but what we're aware of, it is nowhere at that level. Okay. And that's what makes COVID dangerous, is that it's able to spread undetected, and then it causes damage mainly on people that have pre-existing conditions, or basically age.
Okay. Now, several students wanted to know, as a member of the biotech community, how have you seen the industry change during the pandemic? And for instance, what's being done in general, or specifically even with BioRad?
What is a lot of these biotech companies, it's all hands on deck to figure out what can we do as far as testing, research, so we can figure out this organism better, and supporting, groups that are doing the vaccine works and things like that. I mean, at BioRad, the whole world is shifted to how can we supply people with enough of these kits to get testing done at the levels that we need to figure out what's going on from an epidemiology point of view. I mean, to like highlight it, like I work in the bioeducation group, right? We're mainly out here supporting educators. We've got people in the marketing team at BioRad and like in R&D that once they get done with their normal duties during the week, they're going in on the weekends to help make sure that manufacturing is able to just run 24/7 so that more of these testing kits can get out of there for testing to see if people have the virus right now. You know, so that's what's going on big time in Hercules. The other thing is like BioRad has spent an enormous amount of effort trying to figure out how to build testing kits that are not only sensitive, but accurate. So a lot of the tests that ended up on the market really early were not very sensitive and they weren't very what we call specific. So let me break those two things down for you. Specific means that when you use a test, it tells you have COVID-19, not that you are infected with, say, another coronavirus, which a lot of these original tests that ended up on the marketplace were doing. They basically can tell you, yes, you had a corona infection. Also, there's the sensitivity. At what level of the virus or at what level of antibodies are they able to detect it? And to highlight some research that we've seen around this, in the UK in mid-April, a group basically collected all of the tests that were available on the market at the time for serological testing, basically seeing if you had antibodies that could tell you whether or not you'd be infected. And they were only 45 to 30%, or they were missing 45 to 30% of people that had the antibodies because the tests just weren't sensitive enough. And so BioRad has really put a lot of effort into making sure that we've got this high sensitivity and high specificity for this. But I mean, it's been 24/7 developing and then also figuring out how to ramp up manufacturing in order to provide things so that we can do the testing. And this is going on all across biotech. It's been really, it's been really hopeful to see how people can organize so quickly to try to solve this.
Okay, so what I understand you to say is that BioRad is more focused on the testing side of it.
Yeah, so BioRad, I would say, just based upon our strengths, we've always been in testing. So we have a lot of in-house knowledge on how to make these things, not only from the manufacturing side, but from the R&D side, the invention side. We also are making the tools for researchers that are studying the virus as well. You know, and so that will help. It does support people that are trying to make the vaccine. It supports the people that are trying to figure out how this virus, what it does inside the body, how to prevent it from spreading, things like that.
Okay, so especially at times like this, Melissa wanted to know how it is that you guys are collaborating with other, say, biotech companies or pharmaceutical companies and labs with preparing these test kits.
Right. So, I mean, the big thing is that BioRad works with a lot of collaborators because not any institution knows everything. You have to collaborate in order to get things done. And so BioRad has lots of collaborators out there. Within that, there's the legal sphere of that too, right? Actually, a lot of these legal things have been worked out over the last couple of decades of how to do this,
right,
where entities are legally protected, and you know, if there's patients involved, how they also are legally protected and have rights around it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this really well-known system of legal processes to make sure that all parties involved have protection, which then allows collaborations to move forward even faster. Because, man, if we didn't have those and people were trying to work out the legal stuff before getting to work on all of the COVID stuff, like you set all those expectations back years.
Right.
All that stuff is in place, which means that all these places like BioRad and all these other institutions can get right to doing the important work right away.
Okay. So Cheska and Arlie were interested in finding out how long realistically do you believe it's going to take to get a vaccine made for human consumption? Because usually research and development alone usually takes at least 3 years or more. So realistically, how long do you think it's going to take to create a vaccine that can be widely used for human use?
Right. Really? Question. I mean, unfortunately, I don't have a real satisfying answer because a lot of it's going to be the data. Because you guys have it exactly down. Why does it take that long to get the vaccine out? It's because we're trying to mitigate the risks of that vaccine. Make sure A, it's effective at doing what it's supposed to be doing, but also make sure it doesn't cause any harm, right? And so it's going to be really difficult to figure out how do you get something to market fast and mitigate all of that risk that we usually mitigate with time. So unfortunately, I've got to say, like, I have no clue at this point besides it's going to take data. It's going to take a lot of data to then figure that out. And this is why I think it's going to be really important that the public is involved at a level it's never been involved in before about discussing that. You know, because the FDA has set these things up to mitigate risk. And I know that right now they're trying to weigh this balance of what is the risk of this virus being out there longer versus what is the risk potential of this vaccine doing harm down the road.
Right.
And how we balance that is going to be really, really difficult. It's going to come down to data.
Okay.
Things that I would say scientific community. And that's where that one gets really hard to answer because it's not just the scientists saying, okay, this looks good, because you could always test more, right, to make sure something's safer. And so there's going to be this weird give and take on that one. Watch, though, is that you've got, I mean, last time I checked, there's at least 38 different companies worldwide working on a vaccine using radically different methods to develop this vaccine. So like I said, I think we'll get to where we've got something that looks like it's working sooner, much sooner than we ever have with any other vaccine. But then it's going to be assessing safety, assessing long-term safety that I think becomes the sticky point for everybody.
What ways have you seen your workplace change as far as this pandemic is concerned? For instance, any new regulations or requirements when you go into your immediate work environment, or are you entirely doing distance or distance commuting? I guess I would ask that question. And then also, if you have spoken to people that are on the laboratory side.
I'm lucky because at this point, I'm able to do most of my work from my home environment. However, though, manufacturing at BioRad takes people being there. And so BioRad has been very, very proactive about trying to use every single measure possible to limit the chance of spread in that manufacturing environment. And that's, you know, increasing distances of people, figuring out how many people can be in a space at a time, and going kind of way beyond the regulations that, you know, government officials have kind of put in place. And it's one of these things where it's everyone is kind of figuring this out, right? It's building the plane while flying the plane. And so I think the businesses like BioRad that they're doing this right do this incrementally. They come up with a set of procedures based upon the best known science at the time. They deploy that in a small group. They see how well that works, and then they iteratively make advancements and allow people to expand what's going on as far as the manufacturing, things like that go. But it's a very iterative process where everyone's kind of involved figuring out how do we do this best and safe.
Okay. Tamia, which is one of our biotech students, first of all, she wanted to thank you for all the work that you and BioRad are doing under these conditions, trying to get those test kits out there to those laboratories. But what she wanted to know is, how are you handling the pressure of the new normals that you found under these conditions for your work requirements?
Right. For me personally, what I'm realizing is, how do I go out and support educators now that are trying to do learning at a distance? Because, I mean, just the fact that we're here talking is very different than a lot of my schools. A lot of them, the access to the technology isn't really there. They're being asked to kind of go online. And a lot of educators, you know, aren't tech savvy. them running a Zoom meeting or a Google meeting, like it's still like we wouldn't even be here, right? And
Right.
so it's been really hard to figure out how to kind of support them in ways that make sense. And education, as you students know, and as Ms. Jackson knows, this is a huge shift right away. And it takes all of
Yes.
us doing different things in order for it to kind of still work, especially from the engagement side, right? I mean, being in a classroom and being able to talk directly with people and see things hands-on is really different than what we're having to do right now. And so figuring out how for all of us on both sides to stay engaged is really, really challenging. So, I mean, for what I've been trying to do is also kind of build materials that teachers can then use during these times. So like that COVID-19 slide deck that I've sent out, making basically offers like this. Hey, is there something I can do directly for you guys where we can get through questions, we can, get a conversation going. And so it's literally been different for every single group I work with, which has been right. I mean, I would say like work commitment time has gone like to 150% some weeks,
Right.
other weeks. It's just been because you don't know how to help and people don't even know what to ask for.
Definitely.
And so it's been a very, very different world.
So, in the area of testing, Shane wants to know, and I think you did cover it earlier, about the different biotechnology techniques. I think I heard you mention polymerase chain reaction was
Yeah.
one of them. What other techniques were involved in putting together those tests to test for COVID-19?
Okay. So that was part of the slide deck I sent. I'll highlight the ones and kind of step through them to a very high level. So when we talk about PCR, that is basically the foundational technology for almost all of the tests where you're going and getting something done immediately when you think you have the disease. So these amplification-based technologies are what they're using. For the most part, nobody is using regular PCR, though, to then confirm you've got COVID-19. What they're using is real-time PCR, which for you guys that have already learned PCR, it's not a big theoretical jump. All they're doing is adding a fluorescent dye to your PCR reaction that allows you to detect when you have double-stranded DNA. And so what this can tell you is how quickly is the amount of DNA I'm amplifying growing. And if
Okay.
you check that, it can tell you how much starting DNA did you have. And so that is the gold standard testing technique right now for figuring out whether or not somebody has a current infection of COVID. Other amplification techniques that are that came out during this, one that's known as LAMP, or basically thermal amplification, is all of a sudden showing to have a lot of like hiccups, where it's not detecting what people at the sensitivity people would like. That
Mhm.
was a device that was actually being used in the White House, and that's why they had that big scare a couple weeks ago of being infected. And then on the opposite side of it, after you've been detecting people that have a current infection using amplification technologies, then we have all of the immune system-based tests, the ELISAs, the enzyme immunoabsorbent assays, which you guys probably will cover in biotechnology point, and then also the lateral flow assays, and these are kind of like pregnancy tests. Both of these are based upon having antibodies that recognize COVID-19 and being able to use those antibodies to usually get you a color change or an aggregation of particles that allow you to visually say, this patient has the antibodies for this disease. And I can then say, this patient then was exposed to COVID-19 previously because their immune system has built antibodies directly targeted at COVID-19.
Okay. The question, this one was my question because I'm just curious. When it comes to when the vaccine actually comes about, whether it's 18 months from now or 2 or 3 years out, depending, um, do you think that it will be a required vaccine for school registration? Because, like polio, is a vaccination, and maybe even what are your views on that?
Yeah. That's really hard. It's like, you know what that vaccine looks like, right?
Right.
What are the risks? How effective is it? And then also, what else at that time have we learned about this virus? You know? And so I would say I need more data in order to make an informed decision there. I know that's not like a, oh, I can do something with that, which is hard, right? And that's what a lot of science is. Like, you're like, I need to make decisions with data, and I don't have all the data yet that would allow me to make a decision.
Okay, that's fair. I just, I was
Yeah,
just curious, and I thought they would be curious too.
it's a good question. That's one I get a lot.
So, a whole bunch of students were curious about the shelter in place, the SIP. How much longer do you believe that it will be in place for the most part? I know parts of it are lifting. Do
Mhm.
you think that we'll be able to go back to what was once our normal in August, or do you think that maybe by December, or do you think that we are in a new state of a new normal that will continue on past those time periods?
That's also one that like data is going to be helpful, right? And it's actually the okay. So the resolving thing that I do like is that I do see California trying to make those decisions based on data. They're not saying, hey, you know what, July
Go
4th,
on out there.
we're going to open everything up. Everyone's going to be
Yeah,
4th of July. We're saying what we need to see is we need to see the data that indicates that the virus is slowing before we start letting go of some of these restrictions. And we've even seen counties walk back, right? Lassen
right.
was like, they all of a sudden closed down after being open because they said, hey, you know what? We're seeing an increase in infections, so we're going to have to go back to a shelter in place up here situation. And I
Okay.
think that's what makes putting a date on it really, really hard. So I'd say that's another one where data should be and will drive that decision. Um,
So it'll take a little bit more time to just kind of almost like a wait, not so much a wait and see, but once that data comes in, you can kind of better assess where that's
yeah,
going. Okay.
yeah,
Now, on a personal note, because I do spend time with my students mostly each week, we usually kind of talk out what's going on with them, how are they kind of dealing with the SIP.
yeah.
Have you found difficulty with dealing with this shelter in place, the new way that you kind of have to operate your daily life, not to mention your work environment?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have. It's been really, I mean, emotionally tough because I can't see family, I can't see friends, and then also being super paranoid because I used to work in an environment where like I had to worry about single bacterial cells ending up in things. I mean, I'm taking this to the utmost end to kind of keep like my living environment safe, which basically means that every time I go out, I use a specific set of clothes to do that. I come in, I actually completely strip down, go straight to the shower, wash up before basically spending time in my living space. And so that has been self-subjected, but that's just because I feel like we don't know enough about the virus right now to like, not do a little bit of this extra kind of house cleaning per se to kind of keep it safe. And then also personally, I almost lost my father to what we think was a COVID-19 infection in mid-March. And so I've been then extra, extra, extra safe about it, right? Because I'm very aware of the effects this has on healthy individuals that are just a little bit older. In
Okay.
fact, I'm actually really excited because he's finally going to be able to get a test this Wednesday. He's had loss of lung volume. He ended up on forced air at the hospital. And I haven't been able to see him. I mean,
Okay.
that's like, you know how that is. For any of you guys have ever had like a family member go through something, you want to be there. You want to be able to support them. And the only way you can do it is like, you
On
know,
the phone and
advice, which is very, very different. And I know, I mean, all you guys that are listening to this are going to through different degrees of this. So I think the big thing to also think about is not just the inconvenience that people see, right? But the emotional struggle that all of us are going through. And so one of the things I tried to implement really early on in this was that I had literally made a list for myself every week of people I haven't talked to in years. Even some people I didn't like or I didn't get along with all the time, right? And I would just call and just do a check-in. because
Okay.
we keep our humanity within all of this too. And it's really easy if you don't do that to kind of like fall down some of these like really big emotional holes.
Okay.
That's kind of how I've been dealing with it, and it's like I don't take going out into public, lightly. Like I go out once probably every 2 weeks to pick up groceries, and that's kind of it, unless there's something that like I really, really have to take care of. Like I'm just not leaving my place, which I mean, guys, is hard. Like I live in a 14-foot by 16-foot studio with a small kitchen and a small bathroom. I mean,
Okay.
it's not a place anybody wants to be stuck.
Okay. That does sound like a major challenge. It's just, I think, just trying to figure out what really is important. What's important enough to leave your environment. You really have to assess these things,
Yeah,
and I think the precautions that you're taking are, things that we need to consider. I can say that I haven't taken it quite that far. I do change my clothes usually when I come in, but
yeah,
I'm
baby
very
step.
cautious with that. I always have my wipes when I do go somewhere. I'm wiping down cards. I'm getting back in the car. I got my hand sanitizer before I touch anything in there. So it's I'm kind of feeling like I'm underdoing now, but
I mean, but remember, like I'm definitely overdoing, and I know that I'm overdoing.
okay,
Part of it was that I actually almost didn't get. I was taking my 1 yearly vacation when this broke out in the United States, so I almost didn't get back into the country. So when I came back here, I had no clue what it was like on the ground here as far as infection rates and things like that. And so I figured was if I at least started a protocol for myself right away, it was going to make it easy for me to manage my expectation about if I was going to be safe and if those I had to come in contact with would be safe. The other side of this is that my other job is I actually manage an apartment building here in downtown Oakland. So I'm responsible for 26 other people where I know that if everybody's locked down, stuff starts breaking. I have to go into their units to make sure plumbing is working, things like that. So part of me being super crazy paranoid about it is also so that I don't become an asymptomatic spreader and spread it to anybody in my building that I have to help. I know, and it's like it's hard because it's like it's one of those times that, especially for Americans, I hate to say this, it's really hard to think about the fact that what you do potentially has a major effect on other people. So you're not just staying clean for yourself, you're not just being paranoid for yourself, you're taking these precautions to be safe for your community, for all those people in your community.
So,
So
I like the way you answered that. That was good. Um, what do you think, as a former educator of, biotechnology directly to students, what do you think about the CDC guidelines? If have you had a chance to look at those or see any of those?
I looked at one of the first sets that was released, but I haven't like to be honest, I haven't been on it in the last 3 weeks.
Okay. A lot of it is, of course, talking about keeping the students physically distanced from one another, 6 feet, limiting the number of students in the classroom, um,
Yes.
PPE for everyone. And in some cases, some schools may do staggered schedules and all of that. As a former educator, how realistic do you think it is that the traditional way that we have run education will open up? And I know that that still has to do with knowing um, exactly a little more about the virus and how it reacts to people. But what do you think about guidelines like that, or do you think we've permanently morphed into a new realm of education?
Yeah. And you're right on. Like data's gonna drive a lot of that, I hope. I
Mm,
hope. Um, I think in the foreseeable near future, until we have more of that data, more of that understanding of how it's working, that this is kind of a new normal going forward. Um, and those CDC guidelines are basically trying to work with the best data we have right now, right? And being a former educator, I don't know how I would go about doing that in a classroom, especially in California, right? Classrooms are already huge.
right.
You're asking your educators now to definitely spend more time at school just trying to get stuff done. And then a lot of the education that we've done requires people to be in space, close space with each other, so they can learn from each other, which
Right.
becomes really, really difficult. Even if you're saying, okay, you guys can be in the same classroom, but you're distant 6 feet out. I just don't, I mean, I really see adapting to that is going to be really, really difficult. Um, yeah, I'm, I'm at a loss for words as far as what I would say would be the appropriate thing to move forward with. Um, to get back to something that looks like normal. I think we're going to have to reinvent the entire way we're doing things in the short near term, which is not something anybody wants to hear.
Yeah.
And especially, I mean, that's what I'm seeing, and this is the opposite side of it from the pressure on the educator themselves. I haven't seen what's happening to public school funding yet, but I know it's doing this everywhere. I've only seen hard numbers coming out of the CSUs and the community colleges, and I know from like the educators there, you're going from making $5,600 for a class to then making $3,900 for a class coming up in this next semester. You're being asked to do probably 3 to 4 times as much work because you guys spread those students out, spread the times out. I mean, I just don't. It's going to be near unsustainable in the short term. And so it's going to be all of us having to think about new ways that we can make education work that also allow educators and students to not be overwhelmed and stressed by this, which is really, really hard. And that's why I think being a former high school teacher, the first thing I would want to do is make emotional space for my students again, where at least we can have that connection to start. Because once we have that, we can talk about what can we do to make sure that we are kind of moving along in our education, because you do need that. And that's one of those big things that we miss, right, from being in the classroom.
Right.
We didn't vocalize when we were there because you took it for granted, right?
Right.
But everybody at a distance, you realize how much of education is understanding the people around you by being able to have, body language conversation almost with those around you. And so I would double down on that emotional side first, making sure everybody feels emotionally supported, because together is how we're going to move forward and figuring out what to do.
Okay. We had a specific question come from Jamila about some of the research that you've had an opportunity to do. She did some research on your background, and she discovered that you worked on the decontamination of MDA reagents for single cell whole genomes back in 2011. She wants to know what inspired you to get into that particular line of study, and how would you describe the process for evaluating the data prior to starting that project?
Okay.
That's a loaded question.
Yeah, no, that's good. I'll try and work through all those. If I miss one of those points, just bring me back in on it.
Okay.
So this research came out of, this one is working at the National Lab at a place called the Joint Genome Institute in Walnut Creek, part of Berkeley National Lab and Livermore National Lab at the time. So this is a project that was coming out of figuring out how can we look at the majority of life on the planet that we can't see right now. So you gotta remember, we only know 2 to 3% of the species on the planet, which means we really don't know anything about how this planet operates at all. We can barely study the ecology if we can only name 2 to 3% of those organisms. And that's mainly because the majority of them are single-celled organisms that we haven't learned how to culture. So for you guys that have done bacteria in the class, right? You can get things to grow on an agar plate. If you were to say spit on that plate and smear it around, I don't encourage you doing that at the high school level.
Right now.
Yeah, not right now, especially. You're only seeing a fraction of the organisms that were actually in your spit grow. And that's because some of those need other bacteria, they need other metabolites in order to grow. And so what we were trying to do at the National Labs at the time was figure out how can we capture a single cell from the environment and then crack it open so that I can amplify the DNA inside of it enough to actually then DNA sequence all of that DNA. If I can do that, I can start to understand who this organism is, what they do in the environment. We can maybe even give a name to it. It's a way for us to see the other 97% of the organisms on the planet. And so at the core of that, though, is you've got to realize that, and this is where that paranoia comes in, right? I was working in an environment where you had to be worried about a little tiny bacterial cell from anywhere landing in anything that you're doing, because all of a sudden you would start to see that instead of the thing you were starting to study.
Right.
Amplification reagents, one of them was known as MDA reagents, which was multiple strand displacement amplification technique. It's kind of like PCR. I'll do some hand waving and say it's a lot like PCR, some little nuances we won't get into. But with this reagent, I'm getting enzymes from places with the polymerase in there. I'm getting reagents that have the nucleotides, and I'm say getting like sterilized water. Those aren't sterilized to the point that if I let this thing amplify, that it won't self-amplify, which means that there is exogenous DNA or bacteria in there. And so this experiment that you found a paper for was I was trying to figure out how can I get rid of that exogenous bacteria or DNA that's there so that I know that these reagents are clean enough that I can then try to amplify that one little cell I actually pulled out of the environment so that when it amplifies, I see its DNA and not other things' DNA. Okay. And so as far as the planning goes of the experiment, we had to think about, A, how would I detect my DNA from somebody else's DNA? And then at what level of amplification is this a problem? Like if I'm letting this amplify for 5 hours, I don't see it. Is that okay? If I'm amplifying it for 30 hours, I start to see amplification from exogenous DNA, DNA that I didn't want in there. Is that a problem? And so we had to set time points, detection points, sensitivity points for this. So then we could start doing the experiments and then compare them against standards we had already said that that's what we're going after.
Okay.
Project, which sounds really simple, right? How do I take this stuff and make sure it's clean? In order to actually do that, that was about 6 months worth of research. And that's me being there 8 hours a day or longer to make sure that these experiments worked. And so you got to remember, like in science, even to prove really small stuff takes a mountain of effort because you want to be at the end of it and be sure that what you're saying is true, which means replicative studies, like crazy. And I mean, I kind of like laugh like about projects like that, how long they take, because to be sure, it takes time and it takes exactly what you had asked, which was, how do you know? How do you plan ahead of time to know when you've reached a level of knowledge that you can say, yes, we are confident that this is what's going on and that say this technique works?
Okay. So what did you guys do with that particular research after that? Like what came of it after that?
So once we had proven that we could actually do this, and I forgot to say how we actually got a technique to work, which was we'd make up the little master mix. So you guys use the word master mix when you do PCR, right? It's the mix that contains your polymerase, your DNTPs, and your water, maybe the salts, magnesium, and things like that for the polymerase. What I figured we could do with this was put it in a box with UV light. UV light, if you guys remember, can damage DNA. And so we found out that at certain levels of UV light, we could damage exogenous DNA, that DNA that's not supposed to be in there, without damaging the DNTPs and things like that. And so at a certain level of UV exposure, to kind of make these materials clean without destroying the materials. Once we figured out how to do that, it actually led to, I'd say, and it's funny saying this because I worked on the Human Genome Project. It led to me being able to be an author on the most important research that I've done, which was we were the first group to amplify a single bacterial cell from the environment and be able to get the entire genome back. And this is one of those cells that we couldn't culture, couldn't even really name it. We didn't know what it was doing. But this technique now allows us to see that other 97 and 98% of the species on the planet.
Wow.
Um, so you found like the keystone paper basically that then allowed, I'd say, the big kind of breakthrough to take place.
Wow. Okay. Good job, Jamila. um, so as we are kind of wrapping up, is there anything else that you want the students to know about COVID-19 or how they can maybe, I think you talked about it, about some of the things that you do to protect those that you come in contact with. Um, Anything that you think they could do to protect themselves and others from COVID-19 due to their contact?
Okay, I'll kind of go over like the high points of that. First things first, when you're going out in public, do wear some sort of face covering. And when I say face covering, this covers your nose and
And
your mouth. The number of people I see walking around with masks like this in downtown Oakland right now, and like, I'll literally just yell out the window and be like, "Hey, it doesn't work that way. You guys gotta go all the way up."
the whole thing, yeah.
Also, and we gotta remember when you're wearing that mask, the biggest thing that it's doing is preventing droplets from your mouth exiting and getting to other people. It protects you a little bit stuff coming in, but the big part of that is actually protecting others from leaving and going out into the world. Because it's when so many people can be asymptomatic carriers here that you don't know you have it. So if you're out walking around talking, your droplets are falling onto stuff. They're
Hmm.
other people. So by other people touching it or being close to you, can pick things up. That mask does protect you to some degree against stuff coming in, but the big protection is against other people, especially for indoor environments. If for whatever reason you can't wear a mask all the time, the indoor environment is the one that you've really got to double down and be like, if I need to be in there, I need to have a mask on. I can go in, get what I need to get done quick, and get back out. And that's mainly because these indoor environments don't have a lot of exposure from UV light. Remember
Right.
UV light to damage that DNA in that paper?
Uh-huh.
The same thing to RNA. So that UVC light that you have in the sun actually does a pretty good job of destroying the virus at a relatively fast rate. Where those indoor environments don't have that. And so that's why those become very dangerous kind of spaces if people are walking around without masks on, spreading particles all over the place. It's going to take a lot longer for that virus to break down there. Hand cleanliness, it's huge. Guys, I'm a dirty, dirty person. Like, I go backpacking all the time. I grew up on a ranch. I'm just used to like not being clean. I wash my hands religiously now. Anytime like there's a sink and like some soap, I'm going at it, right? And I don't wear gloves. That's because I'm having a hard time getting access to gloves.
Okay.
And that's, that's part of what it is. But to be honest, like that makes me that much more aware of where my hands are going at all times.
Okay.
Because I constantly think about, I just touched this. Oh, I've been outside with this, or I've been doing stuff and I've touched this. Okay, I need to go wash up, right? The other thing, if you want to be super careful about protecting yourself from other people's droplets, we talked about a mask being kind of helpful. Glasses are also really helpful. So, like, when I go out in public, I'm wearing my mask, I'm wearing my lab glasses, and I don't
Okay.
care if I look like a fool because these are some of your biggest mucous membranes. If someone's close proximity to you and they're an asymptomatic spreader and you get a particle that hits your eye, you now are probably get infected. We know this is how the majority of cold viruses spread is through ocular contact. And so having some sort of way to wear protection over your eyes is also very, very helpful. The other thing is leave your shoes at your doorstep. But once you come in, take them off, leave them there because you don't want to be tracking around the outside world right now into your closed space.
Right.
And so that's definitely one thing to kind of be aware of. Have you guys had a chance to talk about how these different mask type work?
No, we really didn't talk about that. I think that I've been trying to keep a lot of our conversations light.
Okay.
So, but I mean, if you want to talk about it, this is the forum that I think they should hear it from someone who knows better than I do.
Okay. So the N95 masks, right, which are these ones that the hospitals really need and want to use. The reason that those are really important for like hospitals to have is what they do is they actually prevent against not only droplets coming in, like your cloth mask will do that, but they actually prevent aerosolized particles from coming in. So a cloth mask, like let me grab some real quick.
Okay.
So like even something like this, right, is like what we consider like a cloth mask. What this does is it'll prevent large droplets from coming into you. It also keeps it from going out, but it can't prevent against aerosolized particles. These aerosolized particles can carry the coronavirus. Aerosolized means that these particles are so small that like your spit, right? When you guys spit, you see it fall out and hit the ground.
Right.
This stuff is so small that it will just float because gravity doesn't have enough pull on it, which in an indoor environment can create a very dangerous space if you have a whole bunch of aerosolized particles around. Hospitals have this because if they're intubating people, basically putting, people on air and things like that, it causes a lot of this to come out. Also places where people are yelling, screaming, or singing, right? Like we've seen in
Okay.
some churches, that activity causes a lot more of these small aerosolized droplets. And so those N95 masks, the way that they work is instead of just preventing against from those small droplets fall to the ground, they actually have a charged particle surface filter, which means it can grab really, really small particles that this won't grab, which basically keeps those small particles from making their way through the mask. And what I
Okay.
mean small, I mean really, really small. The virus itself is 0.125 microns. An E. coli cell is 5 microns.
Wow.
They're really, really tiny. Most like high filter type of things, the best they can do by making a physical barrier is get down to a 0.2 micron. And so that's why these charged particle masks, the N95s, are really important for those indoor areas where people are working, where they have the potential to be exposed to aerosolized particles. So I just want to make sure people know the difference between those masks. But these, right, are still really effective at knocking down those particles that come out all the time, which is probably the majority of the way this virus is getting spread is through droplet particles in close proximity.
Okay. I didn't think about when people yell how much extra spittle there is, and then you're talking about these microphones. So when you said that, I'm just like crowds where people are, especially with everything that's going on now, that's
Yeah,
really scary,
yeah.
just
I
thinking
mean,
about.
so the one silver lining maybe on that is that with a lot of this stuff, and trust me, like it's literally happening on my street in Oakland. Not great, right? People yelling, stuff like that. At least they're outdoors where there's wind blowing,
Okay.
decreasing that environment, right? Of how much concentration there is. Where when you're in a closed system like a building, that's just kind of getting trapped in there. So at least there's a little silver line to that. Still not a place that I would want to be if I'm
Right.
not getting this.
Okay. Well,
Yeah,
right now, I just really would like to thank you for your time and your patience as we put this together. Um, and I know it's a challenging time. I know your schedule is very busy. So I just appreciate your time and answering the students' questions about COVID-19 and your experience. So I just wanted to say thank you for that.
yeah.
Um, I'm going to end it here, unless you have
Okay.
some closing words that you want to say.
I mean, I think the biggest closing thing is like, remember, guys, we're in this together. All these things that are going on right now. So it's like, keep it together. Look at your community, protect your community. I mean, that's the big take home, right?
Right. Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate you. I'm going to ask you to hold on 1 second,
Yeah,
if you don't mind. All right. Well, I hope that that interview was very informative for you, that it has information that you can share with your family and friends that's useful in the climate that we're in. Again, I want you to stay safe, make sure that you're taking care of yourselves and taking precautions, and just wanted you to know that I'm thinking about you.